What is self-determined development for Indigenous peoples? How are Indigenous peoples' rights reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals? The issue of development and Indigenous peoples is a very broad one. In fact, the issue of development is also a very broad one for states and the intergovernmental system as a whole. And it is an area where a lot of resources, efforts, policies, and politics are devoted. Economic and social development is also part of the mandate of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which has systematically dealt with the issue of each and every one of its sessions. Whether the forum's topic is Indigenous children, Indigenous women, the Sustainable Development Goals, or climate change, the forum systematically studies, monitors, and makes recommendations on Indigenous peoples and development. This is how the Permanent Forum opened the chapter of its recommendation on development with culture and identity in the year 2010. Quote, "Development paradigms of modernization and industrialization have often resulted in the destruction of the political, economic, social, cultural, education, health, spiritual, and knowledge systems of Indigenous peoples. There is a disconnect between dominant development paradigms and Indigenous peoples due to the way Indigenous peoples are often viewed. For example, Indigenous peoples' development is understood to be their assimilation to the so-called civilized world. Also, Indigenous peoples' cultures and values are seen to be contradictory to the values of the market economy, such as the accumulation of profit, consumption, and competition. Further, Indigenous peoples and their cultures are seen as obstacles to progress because their lands and territories are rich in resources and Indigenous peoples are not willing to freely dispose of them," unquote. 3 specific articles of the Declaration are of fundamental importance for Indigenous peoples' development with culture and identity. Articles 3, 32, and 37. Article 3, Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Article 32. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. States shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilization, or exploitation of mineral, water, or other resources. States shall provide effective mechanisms for just and fair redress for any such activities, and appropriate measures shall be taken to mitigate adverse environmental, economic, social, cultural, or spiritual impact. Article 37 states, among other things, quote, "Indigenous peoples have the right to the recognition, observance, and enforcement of treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements concluded with states or their successors, and to have states honor and respect such treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements," unquote. 2 major methodological questions have been linked to the topic of development. Free, prior, and informed consent, discussed earlier, and data collection and disaggregation. The first, in order to ensure that Indigenous people's voices and visions find their way and are respected in actual decision-making. And the second, in order to reveal the inequalities and the real situation of Indigenous peoples, inequalities that are often hidden under national averages. Linked to the question of data collection is the issue of indicators on Indigenous peoples' well-being and sustainability. Extraordinary work of analysis has been done by the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and others on this topic. One of the results of these efforts is the creation of the Indigenous Navigator, which is a framework and a set of tools for and by Indigenous peoples to systematically monitor the level of recognition and implementation of their rights. By using the Indigenous Navigator, Indigenous organizations and communities, duty bearers, NGOs, and journalists can access free tools and resources based on community-generated data. At the same time, a question underlying the very legitimacy of the debate on development has been the very concept of development. What does development mean? How do we define it when it comes to Indigenous peoples? Who defines it? The concept is often highly suspected by Indigenous peoples due to devastating acts that have impacted their lives in the name of development. Already the UN prefers to speak about well-being, living well, vivir bien, sumaka usai, sumaka manya, laman laka, gawis aibiak, in various Indigenous languages, when it comes to Indigenous peoples, instead of the term development. And the UN places value also on subsistence economies, on pastoralism, on hunting and gathering, instead of considering them ancient, inferior, forgotten, or negative socioeconomic practices. Yet, when it comes to actual decisions, who says that a program, a project constitutes development for an Indigenous community? The UN and its agencies, a rich bilateral government donor, an NGO, or a church working in the so-called field, a corporation, or a government of a country, or the Indigenous peoples themselves. Indigenous peoples have advocated for self-determined, sustainable development, a human rights-based approach to development, and development with culture and identity. It is these frameworks that Indigenous peoples have been putting forward to inform Indigenous well-being and sustainability. Two sets of rights of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples underpin development with culture and identity. A, the set of rights defining Indigenous peoples' full and effective participation and their right to self-determination. And B, cultural rights. In other words, the adoption of the Declaration now requires new approaches to development. It encourages the building of genuine partnerships with Indigenous peoples so that their voices will contribute to development with culture and identity. And so that, according to Article 3, Indigenous peoples will actually freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. States are required to respect their voices, even when they reflect different visions and cultural perspectives of human development. How are Indigenous peoples' rights reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals? The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, or the 2030 Agenda, adopted by the UN in 2015, include various references to Indigenous peoples thanks to the active participation of Indigenous leaders in their preparation. The SDGs are clearly a stronger framework than the Millennium Development Goals adopted by the UN in 2000 in the pursuit of Indigenous peoples' rights and well-being. SDGs are better. Indigenous peoples participated dynamically in the process of preparation of the document and advocated strongly for the inclusion of their issues. Not only are Indigenous peoples specifically mentioned several times in the text of Agenda 2030, but the overall thrust of the document around some structural impediments and the emphasis on human rights, non-discrimination, and inclusion, as well as reduction of inequalities, is a positive framework for Indigenous peoples. Many of the goals are framed in ways that reinforce the commitments most states have already undertaken under the 10 core international human rights treaties. There are 6 specific references to Indigenous peoples in the SDGs. 3 are in the political declaration, 2 in the targets, and 1 in the section on follow-up and review. However, these references do not necessarily capture the priority issues for Indigenous peoples, nor do they by any means represent the only relevant areas of the agenda for Indigenous peoples. In several of the references, Indigenous peoples are listed together with other vulnerable groups, a characterization that has been viewed with some criticism by Indigenous representatives given their recognized status as specific groups with rights to self-determination. Despite this, the references constitute an important achievement for Indigenous peoples and a step up from the Millennium Development Goals, which had no explicit references to Indigenous peoples. Even where Indigenous peoples are not explicitly mentioned, other references are of direct relevance to their human rights and well-being, including references to ethnicity, culture, and cultural diversity, women, vulnerable groups, although this term is critiqued as mentioned, data collection, and of course, human rights. So, in the context of these rich policy frameworks, what are the minimum criteria of a good practice? In a 2015 UN publication, it is stated that the minimum essential criteria of a good practice in the area of development reflect the following elements. Indigenous peoples are acknowledged as rights holders, and programmatic strategies prioritize the importance of free, prior, and informed consent. Indigenous peoples are recognized as key decision makers and as experts in matters that affect them. Emphasis is placed on the full and effective engagement and participation of Indigenous peoples at all stages of the program. Strong partnerships are established between UN agencies with local institutions, member states, and Indigenous peoples. And a culturally sensitive approach to programming, including an understanding of norms and practices of Indigenous cultures, is incorporated into policy and program design and implementation.